always like to take as much advantage of our time and our presenter's time as we possibly can, because I know that she's got lots of really incredible information to share with us today. So we'll get started and hopefully see some more faces joining as we move along. Just wanted to welcome everyone to do today's presentation. Thanks for joining us, like I said, on a Friday afternoon. I'm really looking forward to what I know is going to be an engaging and an enriching conversation today with Dr. Mary Kinloch. I'm going to start with a few housekeeping items, as always, before offering a land acknowledgement. First, I'm going to request that everybody keep their videos and microphones off for the presentation part of today's webinar. That's going to let you utilize the hide non-video participants feature, and that will help to spotlight Mary as she's speaking. We'll set aside about 10 minutes at the end of our session for questions. So please make use of the chat if you have any questions that you would like to ask Dr. Kinloch today. My name is Natalia Mason. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist in the Division of Social Accountability. I'm joining you today from the College of Medicine's main campus in Saskatoon. Today, I'd also like to share the land acknowledgement from the university's newly launched Tepwewin policy, which is the new truth policy on Indigenous identity. I'll share the link to that policy in the chat when I've got a second here as well, and you can take a look at that. The land is acknowledged as our mother, the earth. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to honor and support the Indigenous peoples, Indigenous cultures, Indigenous values, and Indigenous languages that belong to the land of Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. The University of Saskatchewan is committed to working towards mending colonized lands and protecting the land in a way that demonstrates honor, respect, and love. The University of Saskatchewan extends this commitment to the lands and treaty territories, Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10, that constitute Saskatchewan, the Swift Current, which is Cree and Saulteaux, and all Indigenous people that call Saskatchewan home. We are born to the land, and the land claims us. For those of you who are interacting with us for the first time, the Division of Social Accountability is a division of the College of Medicine dedicated to health equity, anti-racist education, community-based research, advocacy, authentic partnerships, and the health needs of underserved and marginalized communities. We engage with and learn from our communities to support relevant, meaningful, and impactful health professional education, research, service, and advocacy. This year, it's been our intention to focus on different topics each month, each related to a specific health equity need in our community. So for March, we're really happy to be celebrating International Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which was on March 8th. And for today's presentation, we are joined by Dr. Mary Kinloch, a physician and fierce advocate for women's inclusion in health innovation and research. Dr. Kinloch is a practicing pathologist in gynecologic and molecular pathology for the Saskatchewan Health Authority on Treaty 6 territory. She is the division head of Anatomic Pathology in Saskatoon and a clinical associate professor at the University of Saskatchewan in Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. Dr. Kinloch's main goal is to provide cancer biomarker equity to the province of Saskatchewan and use her experience in quality improvement to ensure everyone has access to the most up-to-date and precision companion diagnostics, regardless of geography. Her work with the Women Leading Philanthropy with the Royal University Hospital Foundation as a volunteer chair has raised over $600,000 for female-led projects that have transformed the patient experience at RUH. Really looking forward to hearing from Dr. Kinloch today, so I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here. I do also want to acknowledge that I work at City Hospital, which is on Treaty 6 territory, and in addition to having the privilege, we use our position as healthcare providers in the SHA to work together to narrow the health inequities gap between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I hope to talk a little bit about that at the end. But while I'm excited to talk with you today, I will say that this is not the usual space that I give lectures in. I just came back from New Orleans where I was giving a 3-hour short course on cancer biomarkers in gynecologic and GI cancers. And I feel very safe in that space. It's amazing how science, which can be so black and white, it's easy to give very definitive lectures on that. But so now I'm kind of leaning into this space, and I will also acknowledge that while the title Women Leading Philanthropy in the program is meant to be inclusionary for women, sometimes that language can feel exclusionary, but just to say upfront that the Women Leading Philanthropy program is for anyone that will identify as a woman. So I was going to chat today about how the Women Leading Philanthropy program, which is now a permanent program of the RUH Foundation, after a 3-year pilot that began in 2018, kind of formed as this idea in 2017 as a new program concept of a giving group for women, providing an investment in women-led transformation. So the emphasis was going to be that it was women donors, and we were going to put an investment on women and their families at RUH, and that this was going to be done by the great ideas of women-led physicians and allied members of the healthcare team. So the actual program structure that started in 2017 was, okay, we're going to have 100 women donors. We're going to have them donate $100 a month to put together this $100,000 grant. And then we're going to pick a female-led project chosen by the donors, so every donor gets one vote, to invest this money into. And so the idea is that you're donating the entire amount of what the donors are giving to the program, and that the overhead is done somewhere else by the sponsors. So I think that leads into the first intersection of how this program is, which is that you take on the donor side is the idea of targeting women to donate. Is that really something that's new? Is that something that's different? In the RUH Foundation world, they wanted to target women, not just because they felt like it was an underrepresented as a solo source, but it was showing that women are actually extremely philanthropic and making most of the decisions in their household of where those giving dollars go. Most of the research that you look up when you try and look into this topic talks a little bit about how much money everybody was donating, which I don't find that particularly interesting, but it seemed that they gave a lot of airtime to the fact that, okay, so single women are giving more than men, and that they socialize when they become a family to give more as a family unit. And that these single women, as they become high earners, that they're giving twice as much. But really what RUH was focusing on was that there was this interest in group giving. And late in 2016, even TD was getting interested in it. So they're looking at as women, looking to women as a source of digging into what the motivations are for giving and how it's different than maybe men. So the two major takeaways here were that they're more likely to seek counsel of an expert. So they want a little bit more information about where their money is going prior to making a gift. And again, this echoing of crowdfunding initiatives led by women. So some of the other differences that came out of this research with women and giving compared to men was that they also wanted to see the accountability and the process of where their funding and their donor dollars were going, and they wanted to see it last. So traditionally, I think that we think of big donations that are made, that they're funding large pieces of equipment, that a check is handed over and a handshake is given, and then that's the end of this almost transactional relationship, where there was this need for there to be more of a partnership and a story of what was happening with the donor aspect. And so now you're going to combine the having women donors to women-led projects. We really wanted, as the RUH Foundation and this program, to create this engagement of meaningful change and advancement in healthcare and support women-led initiatives at RUH. And we wanted there to be a real connection between the donors and then the women leading the transformative projects. And so why did we focus in on women? I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that there are major gender differences in how women are funded compared to men in the sciences. Like I'm sure that nobody's clutching their pearls at these statements here that they receive less funding and they receive less opportunities to funding, and that this is sustained over many different areas in STEM research or tri-council funding and over long periods of time. So the application process for how we accept female-led projects is the fact that we're not looking, the RUH Foundation as a foundation towards the hospital has always been slightly forward thinking compared to funding anything that would maybe normally be recapitulated with public healthcare funding. So they're really looking for that edgy project that is right, almost like high risk, high reward, hitting that sweet spot of, we want this to be on the front edge, on the front lines, but we also want it to succeed and sustain. And that is a very difficult tightrope to walk. So the application process for the applicants needs to exhibit how your project's going to be transformational and how it will change the experience for patients and families at RUH. And the one of the differences between Women Leading Philanthropy and between other granting organizations is that we also put a lot of effort on the back end to this process from our applicants. So if you were to look compared to other grant applications for something like research, is that you would normally just stop at the proposal for a project, and then you would get a response back that you were funded or not funded. For us, once you have the proposal for the project, it goes into a granting subcommittee that reviews all the applications and picks 3 finalists. And if you're one of those 3 finalists, you have to then have a full process from the time. So we usually choose it in about May, and we usually have our pitch in September. So from May to September, you're working with RUH staff and RUH donors from the steering committee, which I'll get to develop an elevator pitch, to work with the RUH Foundation team to communicate your project. So we provide that feedback and mentorship, which has been really valuable for some of the applicants. And you're getting it so that they are able to communicate their vision. We all know that everybody has a great idea, but the idea that they can communicate it to a group of people that are not physicians and that are not in their content area of expertise, so that they can convince them that this is something that they should be spending their donor dollars on. So with that, you're also committing to presenting your pitch with 2 other finalists to the donor group, which is, like I said, 100 women at a live presentation. And you have to be there in person when the donor group votes on the winner. So just to go through our yearly process for Women Leading Philanthropy, so all of this is to say that this program was designed based on what the structure was that we saw that women wanted to have. So they wanted engagement, and they wanted to get to know who it was that they were donating money to. So we have these 3 in-person events a year, and we said that they had to be experiential events. So everybody has busy lives, and the donor group for Women Leading Philanthropy is no different. And so we have to make it engaging enough that they're going to want to come out on a weeknight, and a weeknight in January, no less, to be able to engage with Women Leading Philanthropy. So the process is that in June, we usually have this informational meeting, and this was very important for the first couple of years when our program wasn't really well known, so that we could go through the structure. It's a little, like, it's difficult. It's even difficult for me to talk to you about it, because it's like, it's two pieces. It's the donor group, and it's the women-led projects, and it's the fact of how we're going to administrate the grant. But so the informational meeting really allows us to ask all of those questions. And then once we have our grant applicants for the year, which is, like I said, happens May or June, we prepare and mentor the finalists to September. September is the big pitch meeting, and that's where we go to a great place. Last year it was Persephone Theater, where we can really give on the grand stage these amazing women and a place where they can showcase what their great idea is. And RUH Foundation always does a fantastic job of being able to do a video and tell their story ahead of time, and they give their elevator pitch, and then we do a question and answer period. So from there, once the winner is picked, now the real work starts. And for the grant winner, but also for the steering committee, because we have a responsibility to our donors to create and have that sense of accountability back to where their donor money went to. So in January, we bring everybody back for an educational session. So this is also functioning as an accountability piece. So we bring back the winner, and they talk about what they've done from September to January, and then what they're planning on doing for the next year. So when I talk about securing a speaker, is that this educational session, we find that there is a story to be told for everybody that comes through that has an idea, because there's a roadblock there. And the roadblock, for a lot of reasons, isn't logical in healthcare. It's just that this is a large system organization, and it just gets complicated. And sometimes the history of that makes no sense. So we found that this donor group, they wanted to know more about it. And then they wanted to know a little bit more about, well, what were some of the barriers for women trying to do some of these things? And what were some of the barriers for just physicians? And particularly women just existing in the medical landscape. So we've had a number of really fantastic speakers come to these educational sessions. And so then from January till June, we promote the program and get together the grant subcommittee and take in applicants. And then it just kind of repeats itself. And that's how we've been doing it for 5 years. So this is one of the nights where we had the June informational meeting. So inviting guests that aren't part of the program to come and hear what it's about. And in this particular program, we had the previous winners, which was the medical genetics group, which I'll talk about, that they gave an update on their program. And it really does help then the other members of the program, that they are given an update of what the program has been doing, but then we can also showcase what kind of things that we can do. So we have evolved over the last 5 years. So this was the first June meeting that we held to give a question and answer period with our friend Chantel, who you may recognize from CTV News, about what the program is like. And now with 5 years in, our engaged group of donors, they want to be the ones asking the questions. So we allow direct access directly to the women-led investigators of how their project is going and what they expect from it. But it also allows them to get what their knowledge needs are out of the program. So as January comes, as I mentioned, we like to provide an educational speaker. And so we've had a number of really impactful speakers. So this is Amanda Perot, who talked to us on the left here. I'm not sure if you, I don't think you can see my pointer. I don't think it's working anymore, but here you go. Amanda Perot, and she talked about really grounding and how important that is for self and to be able to and be successful. And then we have Dr. Alexandra King, who came and chatted after Dr. Brown Broderick won about cervical cancer, and she was able to give us some insights about cervical cancer and the intersectionality with Indigenous people in Saskatchewan as well too. And then we do give that update from this is again Dr. Yako Kram from the medical genetics team that won, to give an update to the audience. We've also had Dr. Susan Shaw come speak. We've had Dr. Leslie Barron come speak on gender equity in medicine. And we just had Dr. Jillian Horton, who you may know is an author and a physician, and talk about burnout in medicine. And so that
Mary, just quick, there was a question in the chat that said, is Women Leading Philanthropy open to First Nations people?
Oh yeah, everybody is welcome to join. So, again, this is just an example of Dr. King's presentation, which we had during COVID. So then September is the pitch party, and I really can't underestimate how much energy there is in the room here. We have Rachel Milkey, who I'll introduce in a second, and myself, who lead and MC the evening. And we have our 3 finalists that come up and they give their pitch, and we play their video, and we give a little Q&A. And then there's a vote that happens, and we announce it right there that night. And it's very exciting. It is high stakes. And we have RUH Foundation do a wonderful job of providing the celebration that should be recognized for all of the wonderful applicants that happen. So I've talked a little bit about the events, but this is the group of women that makes everything happen behind the scenes. So it's a steering committee comprised of a number of women from different sectors. We do have subcommittees that we work on with that. And then there's a voluntary chair, which is myself, and then an honorary chair, which is Rachel Milkey from, you may recognize, CEO. She's the CEO of Hilberg & Burke. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Rachel and the relationship that's happened between Rachel and I since starting Women Leading Philanthropy, and just what an inspiration that she's been to me. 5 years ago when we met, I couldn't believe what a crystal clear vision that she had and wanted for her own company and what her company stood for. And she wanted very early on women to support women, and made that a core value in her business as CEO of Hilberg & Burke. And that shows through when you know that Hilberg & Burke's purpose is to empower women one sparkle at a time. And you may know this, but in 2013 and in 2017, Hilberg & Burke was commissioned to create a brooch for Queen Elizabeth II to wear. And this was quite shocking to me because it was the opposite of my own thinking. So my thinking was that you as an entrepreneur would say to yourself, I want to create a brooch for Queen Elizabeth, so I'm going to go out and do what I need to be able to be successful to create that brooch for the Queen. And what Rachel was doing is saying, I'm going to be true to myself, and I have a vision that I am going to live, and then the Queen will come to me. And that's exactly what happened twice. So I think the other thing that I've admired about Rachel is that she did stay true to herself even through her own cancer diagnoses as we were going through Women Leading Philanthropy. So Rachel was diagnosed with an early stage cervical cancer that she is currently cured from, which is amazing, but it did give her the courage to step back a little bit from women, not from Women Leading Philanthropy, from Hilberg and Burke as the CEO and day-to-day manager, to be able to go back and reflect on what was important to her and her family, and then restructure her life to actually go ahead and live that again. So I think that probably, I guess I was thinking when RUH Foundation first came and chatted with me, is that they wanted me to be the volunteer chair. And I was like, what's the volunteer chair? So after 5 years, I've kind of developed my own job description of what I see as the volunteer chair for Women Leading Philanthropy. So I am the social connector. I am the social coordinator. I go and tap shoulders. I connect through medicine. Who I think would be an excellent candidate to submit a project. I listen to the issues that come through, and we see a lot of them just through, because almost every aspect in medicine connects with pathology and lab medicine. So I'm able to then turn that into an opportunity and say, have you heard about this program? I also function as a translator for the steering committee and the sub-granting committee. So these brilliant women, when they apply, a lot of the language is of a content expert, and our steering committee and our granting committee are in different areas other than medicine. So really enjoy that role of being the medical translator for the group and getting down to what it really is that this project is going to do, and then going back and helping that that applicant so that they can get that message across. And just lastly, just being an inspiring motivator to the applicants that are successful. So once you get the $100,000, life isn't easy after that. You actually have to do the work, which can be very challenging in the Saskatchewan Health Authority. So just continuing to be the cheerleader for them is part of the role. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and show you some of the successful projects through Women Leading Philanthropy and highlight some of the amazing female physicians that have come through. So this will be in chronological order. Our first $100,000 gift was given to Dr. Yakel Krem, who you see in the center, who's a genetics counselor, and she is flanked on either side by her medical genetics team, with Dr. Kelly Davis being the only medical geneticist in the province at that time. And their project was doing universal tumor testing on an underserved population. So women with uterus cancer, up to 10% of uterus cancer can have a hereditary component to it. And we can test for some of it on the tumor in the lab, but that's just a screening test. And there was kind of a big gap there, but they were able to set up a program so that they could get universal tumor testing, so that everyone that had an endometrial or a uterine cancer of the womb would know if they were at risk of passing that on to their family member. So next is Dr. Sue Kim. Dr. Sue Kim is in the College of Physiotherapy, and her project was to develop a personalized physiotherapy plan for women who have had breast cancer and that have received a mastectomy from their breast cancer. So this is the other thing that the donors really find surprising, is that a lot of these projects, they couldn't believe that hadn't already been done. So not only was it not standard of care, but like, how could it not be? And that these were considered cutting edge leading aspects. But I think probably what made Dr. Sue Kim's project really impressive was the fact that she was tailoring this to each individual person by biometrics that she was mapping out. And then the second thing was that she won in 2019, so September of 2019, and then of course in March of 2020, everything had to shut down. So very easily she could have said, well, research was was not allowed for a period of time at the university during that initial few months of COVID. So she could have just thrown her hands up in the air and said, well, I'm not really allowed to do anything, but she pivoted and instead made it as an app so that she didn't have to bring women into her lab, that she could reach as many women as possible. So this was her patient advocate and patient partner that she was working with, that had a mastectomy and that had young children at home and wanted a specific plan to be able to use her shoulder again to pick up her children. So it was extremely moving. And I'll just highlight here that our picture of Arla Gustafson, who is the CEO of the RUH Foundation for over 13 years and a wonderful advocate for the hospital foundation and an amazing leader. And hope she's happy in her retirement. And then the next year, so the first year into COVID, we weren't able to have things that were in person. It was a virtual event, so everybody was online. It was only us that was in the room. And Dr. Laura Hopkins, who's a gynecologic oncologist, won for enhanced recovery after surgery for gynecologic surgery. So again, enhanced recovery after surgery, if you don't know about it, is a number of small little checklists or deviations that you need to make to ensure that a patient has an uncomplicated post-operative care time. So it's little things like little quality improvements, like if somebody's going to be in surgery for longer than 5 hours, then they need intraoperative antibiotics. If somebody changing the type of prep that they have to limit the number of post-operative infections, changing from having a blood transfusion to getting IV iron. And it was like a number of these small little changes to the pre-op and operative aspect to create an uncomplicated post-operative care. And we're like, how is this not available? It was, just not in gynae surgery, just not when you're operating on women. So she was like, I need to be able to set this up for the women that I operate on. And so she won that year and has successfully rolled that out now for 2 years. And it was amazing. And then the next year, Dr. Jen Brown Broderick, who's also a gynae oncologist, started, and so everybody has biases. My bias is that Jen's project has garnered the most impact that we have seen within the SHA, because she started an HPV pilot project for screening for cervical cancer. We know that cervical cancer screening is not available equally in the province. We know that only in Saskatchewan, that we only reach 40% of the people who need to be screened globally. And then that number drops to 19% when you're going into northern remote locations. So that's not okay. There's lots of different reasons why that is the case. However, one of the aspects is that if you cannot get a pap smear, and there's lots of reasons why you can't get a pap smear. So this is one intervention so that you do not have to be attached to a family doctor, go in to see a practitioner. You can do it from the comfort of wherever that you are, and you don't need to come into a traditional, like a traditional healthcare system to be able to have access to know if you carry the virus that causes cancer. So Jen successfully started this HPV pilot project, and she had a lot of hurdles afterwards as well too. And one of the things that has stuck with me about Women Leading Philanthropy is that Jen said that she would have quit had she not had the donor team behind her being the cheerleader. She doesn't get anything extra out of this other than the fact that we have to be accountable for being physicians and being in the place of privilege that we are, and that we should be doing as much as we can. But Otherwise, there was nobody asking for this. So she really did have to persevere on. And she said that it was the cheerleading from the donor group that really kept. So while we were saying that the donors want accountability, the accountability comes from both ways as well too. We really did create this more of a symbiotic relationship where we needed each other. And then this year we had Dr. Sarah Donkers in the center. She won for, she is part of the MS Chemical research group, and she is a physiotherapist by training, and she won for her project on MS neurorecovery. And this is Haley, her associate here. I wonder if that's, now I'm wondering if I got her name right, but her associate who does the scientific RNA sequencing work. But Sarah, who has this amazing plan that, so everybody, we know that there's tons of research being done in Saskatchewan. We know that we are leaders in it. And a lot of people focus on the ability for you to not to try and stop reducing your symptoms or once the neurodegeneration starts. But Sarah's working on the promotion of getting those back. And the way that she's doing that is through mapping out people when they do decline, what their biomarkers are through RNA sequencing, and then interventions with a neurorecovery program that are targeted to that. And so there's a mapping that goes on to try and figure out which biomarkers are the ones that are creating that neurodegeneration. And like, she wouldn't even tell me what the neurodegeneration biomarker was, because it is that hotly contested of an embargoed secret until they get it to press. So you can best believe that when we come to the January meeting, I will be asking what that biomarker is, like what is it that you looked for on that RNA sequencing that you picked out for our patients. So just to summarize, like this 5 years of impact after we launched the program, we had the medical genetics team targeting everybody, all the patients that had endometrial cancer diagnosis, Sue Kim providing the targeted physiotherapy for patients that had mastectomy after breast cancer, and Laura doing the enhanced recovery after gynae surgery, Jen doing the HPV self-sampling project, and Sarah doing MS neurorecovery. And so that in and of itself, I think, is a fantastic transformation. All of these projects are still going on. They're still helping patients. And that would be great if we just left the story there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what the impact was of the participation of these of the other people that didn't win. So remember that we have a relationship with our donors, and we have a relationship with these women once they've been picked as a finalist. And Dr. Angela Bearwald, who was the finalist the same year that Laura Hopkins was won the grant, is that she was independently funded by one of the Women Leading Philanthropy donors on her work on menopause and ovarian follicular cycling. So that was a major success. And that Dr. Susie Harriman, who's a trauma surgeon, and you can see her project here on translational simulation. So she wanted this trauma simulation program at the University of Saskatchewan, and she was able to get that funded based on I think based on the chatter that was heard about Women Leading Philanthropy when she presented. And these are just two examples. We've had a number of women who were applicants that had their project funded by other means. So a couple of last words. We have a tiered system for donors. So as you can remember, 100 donors donate $100 for every month out of the year, and that equals $100,000. It doesn't really equal $100,000 because that would be $1,200 a year. So we really wanted to focus on the younger philanthropy cohort, and for the terminology purposes here, we're classifying young as under 40. So the younger, the targeting of younger philanthropists to be able to make something of a difference at a younger age. So they have a reduced membership rate of $50 a month, because we want them to be part of the program, and we want them to have certain agency and how their donor dollars, and we want them to be able to see change. And there is this concept of young philanthropists are more likely to be social justice change agents. And you see that here, and this really resonates with me in number 5, that it's the time, skills, expertise, and money. So they don't want to write the check and walk away. They want to be part of. I'm going to tell you, as a physician, you spend so much time on the medical expert of things. You spend so much time on learning the things that you need to do to help patients that I do not talk to anybody. I didn't learn how to talk to anybody. I certainly didn't learn how to write a briefing note within the SHA or ask the Ministry of Health for money. They would never know what I do. So it is about bringing this expertise that all of the donor people that we have that. Like, that is their skill set. They're in marketing, they're in money management, they know how to be persuasive. And all of our applicants that are in healthcare that have this great idea are all benefiting from the donors this way. So I think that this comes up a lot, especially when it comes time for medical students to pick what they want to go into in medicine. And a lot of them say that they want to see social change, and they feel like the best way that they're going to do that is through family medicine. And I applaud that. And I think that that's true. But I feel like that pathology or lab medicine gets left out in the conversation like that, because they don't think of it or connect it in their mind, the idea that the lab is really an agent of health equity as well too, and providing that same level of care for everybody in the province, regardless of your geography. And so that's why Women Leading Philanthropy really speaks to me as well, because there is this idea, like, everybody has a great idea. Everybody has an idea of how they could make their practice or their content expertise better for the patient. And so sometimes you just need a little bit of support through that. So I'll talk a little bit about how the intersection of health equity and pathology has specifically affected me throughout the time that 7 or 8 years that I've been in practice. And one of the most resonating things was the transition to liquid-based cytology. Again, going back to the pap smears, we were so far behind of doing those old style pap smears where you would smear it on the slide, and that we didn't have access to the liquid-based cytology where you would take the sample and then put it in the media so that you could run the HPV virus off of that. It took so long for us to get that to happen, and that certainly was impacting everyone in the province. It was affecting everybody in the province, but like I said, you had to have access to be able to get that liquid-based cytology first. But the second part is mainly my work with cancer diagnostics. So we work in the only molecular lab here in Saskatoon, and we develop the cancer biomarkers here. So it's of no surprise that the pathologists and lab doctors that work in Saskatoon would have the knowledge of that. And then when they talk to their local group of physicians that are taking the biopsies from the patients, is that we're promoting these new tests to our patients locally. But that if you're in North Battleford, Prince Albert, Moose Jaw, Regina, anywhere else, that how do they know that this is happening? So we needed this was going on, and we needed to find a way quickly, because we saw that there was major delays in getting those patients cancer diagnostics if you were anywhere but Saskatoon. And again, I think that this is coming from a place of privilege. And when I say privilege, I mean it is a privilege to work in SHA, but it is also my privilege to have been able to be a physician that there is very few people in the SHA that know what a cancer biomarker or what it is or what it does. And so it is really individually responsibility up to the person to make sure that that gets out to all of the patients, because it's out there, like there is access to it. It's just not equal access, but like nobody's making sure that it's equal access. You have to make sure that it's equal access. And that takes a lot of work. And especially takes a lot of work if like you really could just not do it and still your life would go on and nobody would notice really. So we have a choice in what we do with our day every day. And it's really making sure that you're not just doing it for the people around you. So just a nice picture from when Laura won, and just showing about Sue Kim coming back and Candace coming back, and the accountability of what their projects was and the sustainability of how it went on. And just another nice picture of Candace and Andrea, our favorite cancer geneticist. And I think that maybe people would wonder like how COVID affected us. We did have to go online for a couple of years, and Laura and I sat far apart and Rachel joined us virtually, but we still were fairly impactful with our donor group, because whereas we had a goal of 100 donors, we have grown now to 142 donors. We don't know what we're going to do yet, now that we have almost enough for 1.5 grants to be handed out. I think that the steering committee is chatting a lot about that, of what an amazing problem to have. And just the fact that we have had transformational sponsorship with Sky Planning, who covers the cost of all of our meetings for our donors, including the pitch meeting, so that all of the donor dollars can go right to the project. It has been more difficult than we thought to secure sponsors. Even we talked to one of the pharma companies, and they initially said that our program was exclusionary to men, so it didn't really fit, which was kind of hard to hear. But we still are hopeful that there is a sponsor out there for us that would be interested in this. And then we are under new leadership at the Royal University Hospital Foundation with Jen Malloy, who's taken over for Arla. And so we're very happy to hear that Women Leading Philanthropy is now a permanent program of the foundation, and that we work really hard to make that a success going forward. And the new avenues that I think that we want to try and expand in, like I said about the young philanthropy, but also to increase the diversity. I think that we're pretty fully saturated with like the affluent white woman. Like we've captured that audience now, and that's great. Like we're from all different backgrounds in terms of it's accounting and business and entrepreneurial and money managing and medicine, but like there are other women out there that we need to reach out to and try and figure out how to be inclusionary in there as well too, so that we have like an accurate representation of what our community really is. So if you have a good idea and are in medicine and you want to explore a little bit about what the being an applicant for Women Leading Philanthropy is, you can put it in here. I was also going to put it in the chat, but I can't quite capture it and put it in the chat. But you can do that here. And if you want to become a member of Women Leading Philanthropy, then that is also on the RUH Foundation website. And it's under the programs, it's just Women Leading Philanthropy. So with that, I will just say thank you. And thanks to DNM Photography for those great pictures, and Sky Planning and all the people at the RUH Foundation that make this very exciting program to be a part of.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Kinloch. I didn't mention this earlier, but I've been a member of Women Leading Philanthropy since 2018 and have continued to stay involved. I think partially just because I'm struck by how many inequities there are for women who are in the healthcare system. And some of it seems so basic. Like I remember with Dr. Hopkins' project specifically, at one point, we were just talking about like soap. and making sure that people had access to the right procedures that they need to be able to heal properly. And so that's been really interesting for me. And I hope that it also, that's part of why I wanted to have you today, is so that people realize that even within the healthcare system, for women who are arguably 50%, if not slightly more of the population, are still not being considered in the ways that they should be throughout the entirety of their engagement with the healthcare system, right from like diagnostics to treatment. So that's been really interesting and exciting. I also wanted to share some comments from the chat, specifically about the fact that Saskatchewan is land that has been stolen from the Crown or from the Queen, and that herstory looks really different for colonial Canadians to the Indigenous people that have been on these territories for a really long time. And I know that that's something that has been apparent in many of the presentations that I've kind of been involved in with Women Leading Philanthropy, that will often see overrepresentation for Indigenous people where some of those healthcare needs are concerned, but perhaps underrepresentation in terms of like involvement or engagement in the healthcare system. And I'm thinking about Dr. Brown Broderick's project a little bit more specifically. You kind of touched on this, but the rurality piece is really critical, but rural often, and we talked about this actually in our last webinar, in Saskatchewan means more Indigenous people than would be perhaps in like urban settings. So how does your program kind of consider some of those needs?
So a lot of it has been a learning experience as well too, and that's where we were so fortunate to have Dr. King come on there and provide some of that education, because yes, we wanted to make sure that we made it to those remote communities, but the idea didn't enter into us that it was like, okay, so you're going to come into this community and like you don't know when anybody, like, have you ever given the thought to like, maybe there's other people coming into these communities as well too. So you want to come in on a Monday, but other people are coming in on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. And it's like, it's pretty disruptive for people. And I think it was a little bit of naivety as well too. And that we thought, oh, we're going to put it out on social media. But we learned pretty quickly that that's not really how the communication happens there. And like, you're not going to get very far with that. So we've partnered with Terry Gardner, who's been great. And who also has provided us with a lot of wisdom about how important the radio is up in the north, and to get the information out that way, and that you're not really going to be able to have a direct line. Like, you better get some people on your side that can have that kind of translational aspect to be able to invite you into the community. So that has been something that we've been really thankful for with that aspect. And it still continues to be a problem with the rural and remoteness of Saskatchewan, and how do we try and get the same healthcare for everybody in the province. But that's just something that we just have to commit to solving. And then just like, the worst thing I feel like we could do is just say like, well, I mean, like, I don't know. So it's just trying to come using the intersection of technology and new ideas to hopefully bridge that gap. And one of the things that we've done in the lab, because we have limited resources, so when we take on new projects, how do we decide what projects we're going to take on? And so we have like a matrix of things that we balance it across. And one of our things is, are we helping rural remote patients? Are we helping Indigenous patients? Like, is this going to benefit them? And then if it is, then it kind of gets bumped up the list a little bit more.
Fantastic. Well, I actually forgot also to invite everyone to turn their cameras on, so you can see that you've got a lovely audience with us here today as well. I'm wondering if anybody has, I see a question in the chat there, so I'll read that one quick. It says, how do you handle donors that are not within the $600 a year under 40 or $1,200 a year over 40? Since there's another category, if someone donates other, are they part of the group that gets to decide on applications?
So just trying to be as inclusionary as possible. I think that if we were presented with that we would be able to work with that. the RUH Foundation staff is so great. And I mean, every donor gives feedback, and we just can't get enough of it. So we would be happy to work with anybody that doesn't fit within those binary parameters.
Fantastic. And then a question from Lynn that says, are people aware that Canadian health is not necessarily the same as First Nations health? And I know I've heard Lynn ask some questions along the same lines before, but Lynn, could you give some examples of things that would maybe be included when you're talking about Indigenous health and some of the different kind of like approaches to treatment and that kind of thing? Oh, I can't hear you. Okay, well, I know I've heard you share some before, so I'll say what some of them are, and then you can add them in the chat, and I'll share those for Mary as well. But I know that I've certainly heard you talk about things like sweat lodges in the past, or being able to take time and space to talk with elders about treatment and healing and those kinds of things. And so I imagine that you're wondering just like how those things could be incorporated into treatment and that sort of thing for patients in the future.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I can. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to really explain this because I think this is a huge gap that we've continued for decades, hundreds of years, that we signed treaties in 1967 that we have our own health care system. We need to hold our own records. When we do research right now with Indigenous people, it's held under Health Canada's umbrella. We have our First Nations healthcare. Why aren't we keeping our own records? Why are you guys keeping records? And that being said, I'm working very hard to introduce Indigenous healthcare. When I go to the doctor, I don't want to be prescribed pills. I want to be prescribed a medicine person or a sweat lodge. That's my right as a First People of Canada. And I really, really wish we would understand that our healthcare money is separate from the rest of Canadians. So when are we going to learn to balance that? And you can't govern our research no more. I mean, I love you guys. I love the work that you do, but we need now to hold our own information, our ownership and control. That's all, like OCAP. Why are we not doing that? We're repetitively repeating the same thing. And I love Dr. King, but Dr. King is very new to Saskatchewan, doesn't know and hasn't lived and understand. She works specifically in HIV/AIDS. Well, just in HIV/AIDS alone in Saskatchewan, you guys have 20 new cases a month, 5 deaths a week. And we're getting worse and worse. So that's telling me whatever we're doing, wherever we're putting money from, it's not going where it needs to be. And I thank you guys for your donations, but a lot of these donations aren't impacting the people that are really needing it. It's yeah, I'm sorry, but I think Saskatchewan needs to do a little bit better and understand that Indigenous health is separate from Canada health. Miigwech Osiem.
Thanks for those comments, Lynn. I think that you always bring such a critical lens to these conversations. And I do think that one of the things that's fortunate about this space and these webinars is that there's often people who have the ability to make decisions about things like that and to shift some of the resources and to shift and share some of the power and that sort of thing. So always a really important reminder for us. There's another question in the chat. I don't think we're going to have quite enough time to get to it because I like to make sure that people are able to move on through the rest of their day. But I did want to, again, thank you, Mary. Appreciate you joining us so much today, and to all of our attendees as well. I'm going to post the link in the chat for next month's webinar. We are going to be joined by Dr. Janet Tatusis, who is a family physician and also the Vice Dean Indigenous Health at the University of Saskatchewan here in the College of Medicine. And Dr. Tatusis is going to be talking a little bit more specifically about the theme of Indigenous health from like that health and wellness perspective a little bit more specifically. So we're really excited to have her and hope that you'll be able to join us as well. And then I would also mention that following the webinar, you'll receive an email from us with any relevant links, resources that have come up during the conversation, and then also a survey. And we always really value your feedback. So be sure to stay in touch, follow our newsletter, and we'll hope to see you next month.